Hello guys, Sir Vertigo here. Today, we're doing a two-part episode. We're going to cover both Azlant and Thassilon, because there's not quite enough info on either one to make a full video by themselves. So, we're going to save time, cut to the chase, and talk about both. I hope you enjoy. Spoiler warning before we start. We're getting into events that reach modern day. There will be spoilers for certain adventure paths in my videos. Personally, I would still watch them because it's pretty easy to not metagame, since little to none of this info will be story details. Now, on to Azlant. Azlant was the earlier of the two civilizations, so that's a good enough reason for me to start with them. Azlant starts in the Age of Legend, which is from an unknown year to the start of the Age of Darkness in negative 5293 AR. This time period is largely conjecture and myth, so we don't have very many concrete dates, so I apologize for the lack of years in this next section. Historians seem to agree that for the most part there are two possible origins for the Azlanti people. Some believe they arose from the Aboleth slave pits, possibly showing that the Aboleths experimented and manipulated primitive humans and gifted them with advanced intelligence to make better and more interesting slaves. Others believe the Aboleths were less hands-on and simply pushed cave-dwelling humans on the path of advancement, accelerating an evolution that would have happened regardless. Either way, all scholars agree that in the thousands of years before Earthfall, the Aslant had reached heights of art, philosophy, science, and magical ability that has still never been reached. And until mere days before the Earthfall, they were unaware of the Aboleth's grasp on their culture. Early in the Azlant culture, they came into contact with the ancient serpent folk, a race that had been on their own downward spiral following an ice age that saw their population greatly reduced, and many of their former territories lost. With both races attempting to expand, it quickly escalated into a full-blown war, with the serpent folk allegedly having allied themselves with the Lenorm, the precursors to true dragons. And for a time, the serpent folk were pushing the Azlant back, but that all changed when Savith, a female Azlanti heroine, defeated Yudurcius, the god of the serpent folk, in single combat. Due to her mortal status, she was unable to deal a killing blow to a deity, but she was able to detach his head from his serpentine shoulders. She cast his head into a lake of fire and banished his body into the Darklands, but sadly, she was poisoned during the conflict and died shortly thereafter. With their god dead and their spirits broken, they retreated into the Darklands, where they entered a magical sleep for centuries. Only recently have the serpent folk begun to awaken. Around the year negative 6530 AR, Emperor Shin was exiled from Aslant by the mystics that ruled Aslant for daring to speak out and promote the belief that the Azlanti should open their borders and cooperate with the other races of Golarion, such as the elves and the dwarves. Sometime later, between negative 6530 and negative 5293, legend says that the Azlanti Queen Zura possessed such a lust for life that she began feeding on her own kind. Even thousands of years later, people still whisper the legends of her savage feasts and her habit of bathing in human blood. Her lust for life was so great, she believed herself immortal, and legend says that upon her death, her soul was sent to the abyss, where she immediately rose as a succubus vampire, the first vampire in all of creation. By the time Earthfall had rolled around, she had ascended to Demon Lord status. Culturally, despite its status as one of the most magically and technologically advanced human cultures to ever exist, there are very few records of day-to-day life. Most of the artifacts that remain still draw great wonder and praise for their amazing effects. Azlanti architectural styles and symbols can be seen across Golarion, copied from ruins and used as inspiration by countless cultures in the 10,000 years since Aslant's fall. One of the better known factions of Aslant were the Spindle Solution. They were responsible for the development and creation of the legendary Ion Stones, magical stones that circle the user's head and produce various magical effects. However, some scholars believe they were the false front for a shadowy group known as the Ion Imperative, Aslant's secret espionage agency. They were on direct orders from the Emperor of Aslant to foster and defend Aslant's interest, especially in its ongoing fight against the Serpents. The Ion Stones are one of the most well-known artifacts that are commonly found from Azlant. The leadership of the Pathfinder Society is especially enraptured by the stones, but they have very limited real understanding of them. The Azlanti people spoke a language known as Azlanti. Even though it hasn't been actively spoken in millennia, its legacy can be traced to Taldane, Polyglot, Hawlit, and Varisian languages. Azlanti names were often archaic and can still be found on artifacts, wall mosaics, or manuscripts that have persevered throughout the years. Azlanti names almost always begin with a vowel and never include a surname. Popular male names include Akorin, Olhas, Uresta, while females had names such as Iome, Omara, and Alestria. Little to no actual Azlanti clothing has survived till today, but paintings show that they favor deep green and crimson colors, especially among the nobles, and which is still followed by those wanting to be perceived as having a strong Azlanti heritage. The Azlanti worshipped a few gods that are still worshipped today, while others have fallen out of favor or been killed in the years since. We've already discussed Amazanin and Akovna in my past videos, but they also worshipped Kurchanus, who was eventually killed by Lamashtu for his dominion over beasts. They also worshipped Desna, Pharasma, Shaylin, and Abadar, amongst other gods. Even though true Azlanti are virtually non-existent, with magic it's also always possible for there to be more than we realized. Out of all the species that have descended from the Azlanti, we can't be fully sure if they are true descendants, but evidence does seem to point to that conclusion. We have the Gilman, Azlanti, who were believed to have been saved by the Aboleth and flesh-warped into new aquatic forms. Despite going through the efforts to save them, the Aboleth apparently quickly lost interest and let them free sometime after their creation. The Dark Folk, also known as Caligni, are another branch of Azlanti and are the survivors who fled into the Darklands before the Earthfall. The Morlocks of the Darklands, specifically the middle level known as Sekamina. Unlike the Caligni, they began aggressive inbreeding, hoping to remain pure, until they took on this broken and twisted form. But the most interesting to me are the Munavris humans. They were sailors, out at sea at the time of the Earthfall, and were abducted by the Aboleths, much like the Gilman, but they were merely taken to the seas that flood the area known as the Sightless Sea in the Darklands. Through centuries of exposure to Aboleth magic and Darklands radiation, they have gained telepathic powers that they now put to use fighting the Aboleth, as one of the few good aligned races in the Darklands. Aslant's downfall follows most of the other civilizations of this time, with their civilization largely being destroyed by the Earthfall in -5293 AR. Eridan, one of their few survivors, led the rest of the Azlanti that made it east to what would one day become Taldor. Now, we're going to drop Aslant and move east to Thassilon. Thassilon begins with Emperor Shin, an Azlanti citizen. Exiled for promoting the belief that the Azlanti should be learning from the other races of Golarion, they traveled east to northern Avestan, settling in the land that would one day become Varisia. There, they discovered the people known as the Shanti and the native Varisians. Shin was a prodigy in the fields of magic, and after years of studying with elves, ancient dragons, and inscrutable outsiders, he developed an entirely new form of magic, called rune magic. He also brought knowledge of the goddess of rune magic, Lysala, to the new empire. As the size of this new nation grew, Shin divided Thassilon into 7 fiefdoms and entrusted his advisors to rule one district each in his stead. Each of these advisors specialized in a different school of Thassilonian magic, and was guided by the Azlanti virtues of rule, as passed down by the goddess Lasala to Shin. He believed with the 7 virtues, which were generosity, love, humility, temperance, charity, kindness, and zeal, a kingdom could be created that would be everlasting. Each of his advisors were the most skilled wizards in Thassilon, and each of the wizards were drawn toward one of the 7 virtues. Despite Shin's wishes, over time, his advisors were corrupted by the power they wielded, and they began following corrupted versions of each of the 7 virtues, turning them from their noble origins into greed, lust, pride, gluttony, envy, wrath, and sloth. Thassilon expanded, creating multiple settlements across Golarion that survive till this day, at least as ruins, with each of the advisors forming their own capitals within their domains. Bakra Khan, the Realm of Wrath, was ruled by the Rune Lord Aslant. She regularly waged war with Karzog, another one of the Rune Lords, and remains of their battle can be seen amidst the coast between the 2 kingdoms. Cyrusian, the Realm of Pride, was ruled by Rune Lord Zandergul. This realm was the most powerful of the 7 capitals, and as such was considered the capital of Thassilon as a whole. Asasriel, the Realm of Envy, was ruled by Rune Lord Belimarius. Asasriel was rich in resources like timber, gemstones, and iron. They supplied many of the giants that Thassilon would go on to enslave. Earthnia, the Realm of Lust, was ruled by Rune Lord Sorcian. This realm was responsible for much of the Empire's brothels, and its citizens had such a love for exotic slaves that they were the only region to import slaves from outside of the Empire. Gastish, the Realm of Gluttony, was ruled by Rune Lord Zutha. It was a peaceful land with massive verdant fields. It outsourced many of its bountiful crops and grew rich off its excess foods. Haruka, the Realm of Sloth, was ruled by Rune Lord Kroon. Haruka was the home to many of the Empire's slaves, and as such, its residents were incredibly lazy, with most of them partaking in slavery just to avoid any form of work. Shalast, the Realm of Greed, was ruled by Rune Lord Karzog. Shalast was the wealthiest of Thassilon's domains and second in size only to Cyrusian. It had a massive wealth of gold, copper, mithril, and gems, more so than any of the other domains. It is said that its cities had streets paved of gold. Shin spent much of his time after appointing his advisors deep in magical research. One of his greatest creations was the magical Sahedron, a 7-pointed star, with each tip made of a different sky metal. Each shard held a different power, and together the wielder was able to do great but unknown things. He had grown oblivious to the corruption growing in his advisor's heart, and it was only after many poisoned meals and failed assassination attempts that Shin became paranoid and began removing people from his palace, replacing them with clockwork minions. He began the process of placing his soul into a clockwork reliquary, but was stopped when his rune lords made their move against him. Stopped in the midst of a magical ritual, Shin sabotaged his own ritual to cause a massive firestorm that destroyed himself, his crystal palace, and much of his clockwork soldiers. However, there are rumors that gathering together the shattered Sahedron will allow Shin's soul to regain its body, but the Rune Lords were careful to separate the pieces, suspecting that Shin had a contingency plan. He was old, but he wasn't stupid. After Shin's death, the Rune Lords realized they couldn't continue this cycle of open warfare, and they agreed to call an end to the fighting in favor of combat between champions each Rune Lord had chosen. These chosen were given a special blade, known as the Alara High, that was tied to the Rune Lord's power. As the Earthfall drew near, each of the Rune Lords prepared their own separate plans to survive past this cataclysm, but if they succeeded in surviving is to be seen. The chief deity in Thassilon was the Rune Goddess Lasala, whose worship was introduced by Emperor Shin himself. It was her teaching of rune magic that gave the Empire enough power to match Aslant in only a few hundred years. Even though she wasn't believed to have been an evil goddess, her message was ultimately corrupted by the Rune Lords, and most see her as at least a neutral, if not evil, goddess. Other deities worshipped during this time included the Peacock Spirit, Minderhall, Lord of the Stone Giants, Desna, and various fiends in the last days of the civilization. Culture-wise, we don't have a lot of information to go on. Their artwork and naming suggests a real-world Japanese influence, but much of the civilization's impact was lost during Earthfall as well. Like Aslant, they used ion stones, but advanced the science to the point of being able to implant the stones directly into the user's flesh, granting all of the same benefits, but removing the risk of having the stones targeted or banished while alive. Both are very interesting civilizations, and sadly, we don't have a lot of info on either one. Who would have guessed that having meteors set history back a few thousand years may destroy a few important historical records, right? Anyway guys, I hope I could teach you something new. If I succeeded, let me know in the comments. What do you want to see me do my next videos on? This is the end of my ancient arc, so any nation, deity, event, any topic is now open for discussion, so please, leave me a few suggestions. Whichever ones get the most attention, that's what I'll do my videos on. Let me know what you want to learn about. But I hope you've had fun. Have a good one, guys.